My name is Barry Vesser, and I am from the Climate Center. The Climate Center is a clean energy and climate policy nonprofit working in California to reduce climate pollution at speed and scale. And we're kind of a think tank, do tank. And we've been working on geothermal policy for like the last 2 years. So this beautiful picture is from Yellowstone. It's the Grand Prismatic Geyser in Yellowstone, and you can just see the beautiful colors that are minerals coming up from deep inside the earth. So I'm going to start out with just a little bit of science. Here you can see the Earth sliced into its core. So the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old, and the first 500 million years of the Earth, so that's a half a billion years, it was a flaming ball. So the Earth used to be like this all over, and now it is slowly cooled over 4 billion years, and between that slow cooling in the interior and radioactive decay, you have a heat source in the Earth that's going to be here for a very long time in human scale. So people have been using geothermal for thousands of years, been used by the Chinese, indigenous North Americans, ancient Romans, and it's been used for bathing, spiritual practices, health, all kinds of things. And turns out that animals also appreciate geothermal. These are snow monkeys in the Nagano Prefecture in Japan enjoying a hot spring dip. So this guy's name I can never remember. His name is Prince Piero Gianori Conti, and he was the one who first practiced with geothermal in Italy. This is in Tuscany. He actually got that contraption there to use steam to power 5 light bulbs. And then after a few years, they built an actual geothermal plant there in 1913. So this is the first plant. This is a big plant in California. This was built in 1960, and it's called the Geysers. It was built by Pacific Gas and Electric. The first one was about 11 megawatts. But this is now the largest geothermal resource in the world. It is 1.51 gigawatts of electricity, which is a lot of power. So we're going to talk about a very specific kind of geothermal energy today, but I just wanted to give you a very quick overview of the different kinds of geothermal. And I should have said at the beginning, so geothermal, geo is the Greek for earth, thermal, heat. So it is earth heat. That is what we're talking here. We're talking about using the heat of the earth to actually power electric turbines. So the first kind you may have heard of is geothermal ground source heat pumps. These are usually house level or building level, and they use the ambient temperature of the earth. So basically just under the Earth's surface, the temperature is almost constant. So you can use that to be both a heat source in the winter and in the summer be a heat sink. So this form of geothermal energy, it doesn't generate power, right? And it does use a little bit of electricity, but it's very energy efficient. And then there's what they call low temperature district heating, naturally sourced. So that's when you're using the heat naturally coming up from under the ground, and you're putting the hot water into pipes, and you're heating a building or a series of buildings using it. And then there's conventional geothermal. So the thing about conventional geothermal is, you need just the right conditions to have it, right? Because this is a naturally occurring phenomena. So it's where the hot rock is very close to the surface of the Earth and can be relatively easily tapped. And there's a whole bunch of different types of geothermal, conventional geothermal. I'm not going to go into that too much because it's not that relevant to our discussion here. But the thing to understand about this is it's a great source of power. I just told you the geysers is a huge source of power, but it's relatively small in the global scale because you have to have just the right conditions until we get to advanced or next-gen geothermal. So what makes an advanced geothermal energy system? First thing is you're tapping high heat rock deep in the earth. So those conventional systems I told you about, they're usually fairly close to the surface of the earth. They are utilizing technologies developed for the oil and gas industry to go much deeper and also to dig laterally, which we'll talk about in a second, and to frack. We'll talk about that too. So enhanced or engineered geothermal systems, they produce permeability in hot rock. So imagine you have all this hot rock down there, right? But you don't have water. So they frack it to create permeability, and then they introduce water into it, and then they extract that water, and the steam it turns turbines. Closed-loop geothermal is what it sounds like, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. It's a system where it's completely encased in pipes, and it comes all the way around, so you don't have a reservoir like you do in the enhanced geothermal. And then there's a very nascent technology. It's called high-power microwave-based drilling for geothermal. And the reason this is important is because the deeper you get, right, the harder it is to get the tailings out of the drilling hole you're doing. And you basically get to a point where your drill can't go forward anymore. Well, this high-power microwave, it basically vaporizes the rock. So it eliminates some of those problems, and it can go much deeper. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to apologize. This header here is really not that well done, but the pictures are fine. This is a conventional geothermal plant. This is a naturally existing reservoir that they're tapping into, right? Period. That's all that happens. Here, we have what we'll call an engineered system. So you can see they've put down, they've drilled a hole, and they've cased it with pipe, and then they've created a lateral extension into the rock, right? And if you look at that lateral extension, you can see things coming off it because they've fracked that rock. And then they put another thing down there to inject high-pressure water into it and re-extract it back out. And then finally, this is a closed-loop system. You can see that the connection between the water, it's all in pipe, and it just goes around and it gets heated as it gets into that hot rock, and then it comes back up to the surface. Now, I said that these systems are known for going deep for hot rock. These systems go about 10,000 feet to 20,000 feet. So that's quite a bit deeper than kind of conventional systems. And the other thing they do, as I said, is they drill laterally. They can drill up to 5,000 feet right now, and they think pretty soon they'll be able to expand that to over 10,000 feet. And the last thing is they get very hot rock. So you're talking about between 365 degrees Fahrenheit and 700 degrees Fahrenheit down there. So that's important because, of course, more heat means more energy, which means it's a more productive facility. Okay, what are the benefits of advanced geothermal systems? Why should we care about this? Well, first of all, this is a 24/7, 365 days a year source of firm power that has very low greenhouse gas emissions. Um, it can contribute to grid stability, resilience, and reliability. So in other words, if we're using solar and wind to get most of our power, then this is a system that can complement that by providing a base load so that when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining, you have that base load power going through. And this is a pretty important word for this system too, dispatchable. So in the energy industry, what you want is dispatchable load. So load just means electricity demand, essentially. And why do you want that? Because you want to be able to, you have to balance supply and demand on the grid every minute. Like, it has to be balanced. And so you want to be able to turn up or turn down your source of energy. Well, I'll give you one example of how that doesn't happen. A nuclear plant, right? Nuclear plant's a big thing. It generates a lot of power, but it takes several days to ramp up and ramp down a nuclear plant. You can't just say, well, we're done. Let's turn it off for right now because we got enough power on the grid. Geothermal, however, you can dispatch it because if you decide to, let's see if we go back here, you can just say, you know what, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to generate power. I'm just going to leave that in the ground right now and let the water superheat. So that's a very valuable resource. Okay, sorry, that was a little wonky. The other good thing about this as a source of power, it has a relatively small geographic footprint, which I'm going to cover in a second. It's scalable because, as I said, these are, look at it this way, they're engineered subsurface reservoirs. So they can happen pretty much anywhere. You don't have to have particular conditions for them. I put this in here because this is important, that they can use brine. They don't need potable drinking water. So they're not competing with, you know, the communities that are nearby the facility. They can go deeper and get briny water and use that for their system. And I'm going to talk a bit more about oil and gas worker skills transfer because that's a really important thing for us in California and I think in other parts of the world. So this gives you an idea of scale. This is conventional, traditional geothermal, which is about 28 gigawatts of capacity in the United States. This is enhanced geothermal. And enhanced geothermal, they're saying, is 7,500 plus gigawatts. That is an enormous amount of energy and a huge difference. This gives you the greenhouse gas profile of coal, oil, natural gas, geothermal, and geothermal binary, which is basically, this is a very low source of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's a very efficient conversion rate in terms of turning that heat into power. Okay, I talked to you about the footprint per megawatt. So this is coal, this is solar thermal, this is solar PV, and this is wind, and there's geothermal. It's tiny footprint compared to all its competitors. Now, I do want to say one thing here. I would be remiss. This does not include rooftop solar. Of course, rooftop solar is the best use of land, right? Because it's going on an existing building. So it's using the existing infrastructure. But for a scale power plant, you do not get a smaller footprint than geothermal. Okay, closed-loop systems. I mentioned this before. This is kind of the holy grail, you might say, of geothermal. And why do I say that? Well, because it's incredibly water efficient. You can see everything is kept in pipes, and they use the hot rock to heat the pipes. And in this case, they don't frack. They don't need to. They drill, and they drill laterally. A company that is doing this system now What they're doing is they're doing a lot of these. See how there's one here? They're doing like, say, 5 or 6 of these pipes going back and forth, so they maximize the amount of energy that they're getting from the subsurface. Now, this is still in development, this particular technology. And one of the problems with it is the cost. And the cost is mainly driven by the cost of drilling, but the cost of drilling is coming down. It is directionally coming down, and I'm going to talk about that in this slide. So these are the cost per megawatt hour. Levelized cost of energy range just means that what it costs to build that system and over the life of that system. Now you can see next-gen geothermal. Now that's a target by the U.S. DOE, Department of Energy, of $45 a megawatt. If they make that, that will be great. That will be unbelievable, right? You can see it's below the high range of fossil gas. But let's say they're wrong. Let's say it's 50% higher than that, or let's say it's even double that. So now it's $90 a kilowatt hour. That doesn't look so good, does it? Except I want you to think this through with me. Okay, utility scale solar doesn't do it because it's not a firm source of power. Same with onshore wind, sorry. Fossil gas, we're ruling out because it is GHG prohibitive. Conventional geothermal, you'll see it's right in the range of conventional geothermal, even if we assume it's higher. And here's the one I really wanted you to see. Nuclear. So in the United States right now, we're having all these data centers being built, and the companies that are managing these data centers are looking at nuclear, small modular reactors, to provide power for these. It's a bad bet. So look at this. If this number doubled, it would still be less. Nuclear is the most expensive power we can use. So, other things being equal, that's not where you want to go. Okay, this is, we had an infrastructure bill in the United States, and basically what this is showing you is a real policy error in the United States, but I think in other countries as well. We invested about $8 million in carbon capture and storage, $8 million in nuclear, $9 million for hydrogen development, and peanuts for geothermal. That little red bar there is geothermal. It's maybe a couple of million. This is a real mistake because this resource has tremendous potential. So one of our concerns at the Climate Center is that whatever power system we use is responsive to the needs of the communities that it's located in. And so that means community engagement. That means that we adhere to the local laws around environmental protection. We want it to provide high quality employment opportunities. I'll talk more about that in a second. There are some great examples of this. The California Environmental Justice Association has a great primer on how to do these projects in a way that enhances justice and community involvement. And Fervo is a geothermal developer, and they have a really good protocol for sustainable development. So seismicity. I haven't talked about this yet. So very often, geothermal plants in the past were developed where there was an unstable geothermic region, right? That's why they're there. And what that means is there's naturally occurring seismicity around those areas. Little earthquakes are happening all the time. Now, if you locate one of these facilities in one of those areas, you have to monitor very carefully because you may be inducing seismicity, right? What I want to say is two things. That's not necessarily the case in most of the places these plants will be being put, because they're stable geological formations. They're not places where the hot rock is coming up close to the surface. It's farther down. So it's unlikely to be a huge problem, but you have to site them carefully and you have to monitor. And I'll just tell you, in Pohang, these are two examples, but in Pohang, South Korea, they didn't do a good job of this. This was a traditional geothermal plant, and they had a 5.5 on the Richter scale earthquake there. It required 1,700 people to be moved into emergency shelter. It's not what you want, right? But this, mostly what you're going to see around these geothermal plants are what they call micro seismicity. These are like 2.5 on the Richter scale. You can't even detect that. If you were there, you wouldn't feel it. Okay, so it all sounds good. Where's it happening? Well, it's happening a lot of places, but I'm going to feature two prominently. Beaver County in Utah, there's the Cape Station project, and that company is Fervo doing that. That started out with a 10 megawatt plant, and that's been selling power into the grid since 2023. They are now scaling it up to a 500 megawatt plant, so this is a very large plant. They have another one also in Colorado. It's about a 3.5 megawatt plant. Sonoma County and Mendocino County, that's actually where I'm from. They have a thing they call GeoZone, and they're going to do 600 megawatts of development, and they're looking at closed loop. They're looking at a lot of different technologies to do that. And then the last one I want to really bring your attention to is Brazil. Brazil just this October declared that they are going to explore advanced geothermal as part of their national energy strategy. Okay, so we've been pursuing geothermal policy in California. And one of the reasons, there are a number of things that contributed to that, but one of the reasons is this is one of the only renewable sources of power that is not being attacked right now by the federal administration in Washington. Wind, solar, hydrogen, pretty much all of them are on the chopping block for the Trump administration, but not geothermal. Also, we have a Geologic Energy Management Division, which is an agency in California that's already managing geothermal, so it makes it easier to expand. Geothermal is called out in the Renewable Portfolio Standard for California, so the Renewable Portfolio Standard is how California, first, where we have to go to get to 100% renewable, and then how we're going to get there. Now, unfortunately, this year there was a bill by Assembly Member Pappen. It was AB 536, 26. Thank you, Allison. What that would have done is create a strategic plan for geothermal for California. It would have identified zones that were particularly good for this kind of energy development, but it didn't pass. This was a very tough year to pass bills because anything that had any fiscal tag or needed money from the state, many of those things did not pass. There is some small amount of funding from the California Energy Commission for geothermal, but as I said, that needs to be greatly expanded. And this is probably for California, and I would argue probably lots of other places, the most important thing about this. Eliminate natural gas peaker plants. Okay, natural gas peaker plants. In California, there's some days we have 100% renewable energy on the grid, but we still have lots of natural gas peaker plants. Why is that? Because there are other days when we don't have 100% renewable energy, and we need to keep that on what they call spinning reserve. When you keep a power plant on spinning reserve, that means you have to be able to ramp it up pretty much instantaneously. So guess what? You're paying for that power whether you use it or not. And that's one of the reasons, amongst many others, that California is having some problems with energy costs. So right now, you could say we have almost two parallel infrastructures in California. One is renewable, and the other is natural gas. And by the way, those natural gas plants, they are disproportionately located in disadvantaged low-income communities in California. So there's also an environmental justice issue here. So geothermal is the best opportunity to get rid of natural gas peaker plants once and for all. And I mentioned before the data centers for AI, that geothermal really is the best way to go here. Now, it says here solar and wind and storage don't cut it. They can help. But the reality with these data plants is they use a tremendous amount of energy, and they can't ever be short. So that's one of the problems with storage. I mentioned labor. So in California, we have a very powerful group of unions who are associated with oil and gas drilling. And what's amazing is that geothermal technology has an almost one-to-one transfer of skills between oil and gas drilling and geothermal. They only need 2 days of training. So because they use a lot of the same technologies, they're doing pipe fitting, sheet metal working, all of those things. So we see this as a great transition, because as we phase out of fossil fuels, we can phase in geothermal and have good paying jobs for those workers, which has been a big political issue in the United States in general, and California in particular. So at the Climate Center, what we do in all this is we are policy thought leaders, we are conveners, we do research. We advocate at the legislature to get good policy passed so that we can scale up technologies like geothermal. And I will post my slides, so if anybody wants them, you can get. There's some really good resources here. This 12-minute video is very helpful, I think, in understanding geothermal. And with that, I will see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the nice presentation. My name. Thank you so much for the nice presentation. My name is Matthew from Tanzania, working at Tanzania Geothermal Development Company Limited. So my question is whether we can collaborate between your institution, your company, and our company. Our company is a public entity, and we have a huge resources across Rift Valley system. Almost 5,000 megawatt resources we have in Tanzania, and 15,000 megawatt for the thermal. In Tanzania, we have got 5 flagship projects so far, and we're in the resource confirmation. So is there any possibility for you and us to have a collaboration and partnership just to open it? Thank you.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is maybe. Because we're a nonprofit and we are a policy organization. So I don't think we'd be the ones you want to collaborate with, but we do work closely with a couple of companies who are working in geothermal, and they might be somebody more interesting for you to collaborate in, because they're going to have the technical expertise to actually talk to you about the details of what they're doing and how it works, which is a little bit out of my realm of expertise because I'm a policy guy. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other questions?
Hi, with the Georgetown Climate Center in DC. I wonder if you could say more about downsides. Like, why don't we have more of this? what are the barriers, and why aren't we doing it if it has all the strengths that you're talking about?
Very good question. In case people couldn't hear, she was saying, if this is so good, why haven't we done more of it, and what are the downsides? So I would say two things. One is we haven't done more of it because it's a relatively new technology. And like I said, the big thing was getting drilling costs down. And so enhanced geothermal is not that new. It's been around almost 30 years. But they could never get the costs down. And what changed was they started using technology that's used by the oil and gas industry to drill. And that incredibly increased their productivity and decreased their costs. So they're getting the cost curve down. And in terms of so I think you're going to see an explosion of geothermal growth in the United States, particularly because of data centers and because our demand for electricity is going up precipitously. In terms of downsides, as I said, the footprint is pretty small for these plants. They don't give off any pollutants except for steam, and in actually a lot of them, they don't even give off steam because they reconstitute that steam and recycle the water. And I didn't mention this, but they do use a different. They don't frack the way oil companies do. Oil companies are fracking to extract oil from the rock, right? So they don't use all the chemicals that oil companies use. They mostly use high pressure water. So I think the main thing that's like a thing that they have to pay attention to is the seismicity, and also making sure that they include local communities in the development process. Like I said, they're not ugly plants necessarily, but they are going to have large transmission lines coming from them. They're on an electrical power station and all that entails. So, I think that it's I think we're right at an inflection point, and in the next couple of years, that project I mentioned to you by Fervo, the 500 megawatt plant, that's supposed to go online in 2026. If they get that plant online and the cost of the power is where they think it's going to be, I think that's going to be a game changer. Yeah.
So I'm Roberta Roberts from Liberia. So now my question here is, because we are discussing climate change, and basically it's about the challenges that we face when it comes to climate change. So my question here has to do with when it comes to in the US or California, those dump sites. Can you understand what I'm saying? You understanding me, right? You understanding what I'm saying? I'm saying we are here, we are discussing the challenges of climate change, right? So my question here is, sorry, I'm Roberta and I'm from Liberia. So my question here is, when it comes to the waste products in terms of the diets, so where basically do you really place that? Because I understand that if you don't place it in a proper area or a place, it's still going to affect the community or the environment. So I'm concerned about where do you really place the waste.
Thank you for that question. And the question was about the waste products that are created through the process. So there are really only two sources of waste in this. One is when you're drilling, you always have what they call tailings, right? And those are usually coming up out of the ground, right? Because you're putting pipe down in the ground. So that's one thing. And usually they dispose of that around the plant, And then the other one is water, the kind of brinish water. But as I said, in most of these plants, they're recycling almost all the water. They're trying to reuse it all, so they're not dumping water anywhere. Water is a really valuable resource for geothermal because it's the whole thing, right? You have the hot rock in the ground, but if you don't have the water, then you don't have steam to turn the turbines, and that's what generates the power. So I think in terms of, kind of an issue of proper disposal of waste, I think it's mostly the tailings. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you all. I really appreciate your coming, and have a wonderful rest of your day.